Hello and welcome to 5.6. This is a small section and we will see aspects of this particular section coming in a lot, but this is pest control methods, and pests include anything from weeds to bugs. Now let's kind of take a look at this here. There's a lot going on in the essential knowledge box. And so what we're going to first start off with is the benefits and drawbacks of using pest control methods. Now the obvious benefit is there are no pests and whatever you're trying to grow can grow. But there are a lot of drawbacks. So pest control methods are pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, and insecticides. So your parents may use some of these around the house to control weeds and or bugs that you may have. But the problem is this word right here. And this is bad. People think that animals become resistant or plants become resistant, and they do not become resistant. The resistance is already tucked in their DNA somewhere. It's just that these chemicals target different cells or different aspects of the organism. And then it just happens that the DNA of some of these organisms is not affected by this whatever killer, pesticide, fungicide, whatever. Those organisms go on to reproduce to be the resistant organism. So where it says become resistant, some people think that they gain resistance or they learn how to be resistant. That's not true. So be careful on that. And pest control, these diseases can damage crops and affect what is called the yield, or the amount of stuff you get out of the crops. But, of course, scientists have stepped in, and we're going to talk a lot about what is known as genetic engineering, and that is the ability to scientifically alter the DNA of some of these animals to become resistant to any kind of disease or pests that may eat them. So, sounds like a great idea, but then this is the next problem. You lose what's called genetic diversity. So you may have some crops that grow great, but if one little thing comes in, one kind of disease that scientists didn't account for, the entire crop is gone because they're genetically identical. So there's a lot going on in this little teeny section. So a pesticide is a chemical that are toxic to pests, and pests, once again, can be anything. So we have rodents and fungi and insects and herbicides that kill weeds. Once again, they can cause pests to become resistant. We don't like resistant. We don't like become resistant. But even though that's the saying here, there will be resistant pests that end up coming into the whatever farm, into the ecosystem. Genetic biodiversity gives some pest-resistant traits to pesticides. So genetic diversity, of course, is good, and biodiversity. And pesticides artificially select for pests with resistance by killing all of the non-resistant individuals. So most of the time, the chemical will kill the bugs, and these bugs are non-resistant. They're dead. But you're going to see coming up is something called the pesticide treadmill. And just like a treadmill goes round and round and round, we will see something called the pesticide treadmill. And all that basically means is scientists create some kind of pesticide. It kills most of the pests. The ones that are genetically resistant survive, and they have more babies that are resistant. Scientists come up with a stronger pesticide. There are, again, some genetically resistant pests. Science come up with a stronger pesticide, and so on. That is the pesticide treadmill. But what we're going to come to find out is sometimes bugs that they didn't mean to kill are getting caught up in this, especially bees. And interestingly, birds are having problems with these pesticides. So if you see here, there are this kind of chart here, and you can see that as you increase these resistant crops, you increase these resistant pests. So big time problem. An increase in one leads to an increase in the other, which is bad. So once again, the pesticide treadmill, here's the slide for it. We are continually looking to produce different pesticides to eradicate the pests that happen to be in our area. Stronger pesticides will possibly kill unintended things like bees. Now, yes, we don't like bees because they sting us, obviously. But bees are very, very, very important in the pollination process. And we talked about that earlier in the year with the mutualism. GMOs, genetically modified organisms. We will talk more about this later in the year. But this basically means that scientists have either altered the DNA in some way, usually adding genes, meaning they take a section of DNA from one organism and they insert it into another one. So BT corn is an example. And it is, they took a gene from bacteria and they put it into this corn. And what it does is the corn produces crystals that are toxic to pests but are not toxic to humans. So the corn can grow, we can eat it, but when pests try to eat that corn, the pests die. It sounds like a great idea, but could it be a problem for us moving forward? GMOs haven't been around long enough yet. Roundup Ready crops are GM, or genetically modified, to be resistant to broadleaf herbicides. So, pretty cool idea. You end up with a plant that you can spray a weed killer on, let's just say. Kills the weeds, but doesn't kill the plant. Again, sounds great. So, this is a picture of how they work it. So, they take a piece of DNA out of this bacteria. They insert it into the DNA of the corn. So when the old days, these caterpillars here were nibbling away, now they die. And the corn grows perfectly well. That's what GMO does, meaning GMO resistance. Also, GMOs can be used to have plants grow faster, grow in different temperature conditions, meaning having a longer growing season, or producing just straight up more yield, more fruit or more vegetables or whatever you're growing. So although Roundup Ready crops have increased herbicide use, it's a problem. So if you look here, we'll actually look at the BT corn. So BT corn has decreased insecticide use, which is great. So you can see that with that corn, we didn't need to spray the corn as much, and we see an increase in the yield, which is nice. The chart on the right, herbicide use on corn, cotton, and soybeans since the introduction of Roundup-tolerant GM plants. And once again, Roundup, if you don't know what that is a chemical that kills weeds. And you can see that we have increases in all three crops over just, what's that, about a decade, maybe 11 years? Genetically modified crops are all genetically identical. You will see the word clone. And when there is no genetic diversity, here's where there's a problem. So you may have heard about the potato blight in Ireland, many years ago. But normally, here's how it goes. Normally, there'd be a lot of diversity in any crop. In the event that this blight hits, it may potentially, let's say in this case, it wiped out the light brownish looking potatoes, but there were still the dark brown, the yellowish, the green, and the red potatoes. But if these cloned potatoes or these GM potatoes were the only ones in the crop, and yeah, they're growing great, everything's wonderful, but if the blight hits, they're all gone. And that is not good for the overall production. So it may seem good at the time, but if there's a problem, it's not good in the end. So finishing it all up, we learned a little bit. We're going to see a lot of the kind of, I guess, the meat of this particular chapter, this particular section of the unit. It will pop up lots of times, but this is the kind of the intro. So your FRQ is to describe one economic advantage and one economic disadvantage of using these genetically modified crops. So think about it, write it down. See you next time.